Can everybody hear me? Before I start this talk, I just want to ask you some questions. So how many of you are developers here? Product owners? Software developers? Great. Um, I'm also a developer, and I'm working with Python. And most of the time, I hear comments like this one. The code is right there. Just read it. Can you imagine how much time will it take to debug an application that is written like this? What happens if we have to fix a bug in a rush because, there is an important bug on production? The good thing about this comment is that I feel like Luke Skywalker flying my X-Wing, and Obi-Wan Kenobi is telling me, read the source, Luke. Another comment that I hear often is that good code documents itself. I know, sometimes we can get most of what the code is doing by just reading it. So now that you know some comments that we commonly use when we are developing, let me present myself. I'm Juan Biondi. I'm actually working at Ernie Consulti at Barcelona. I'm an open source contributor, and I'm a kind of maker. I'm a kind of maker because sometimes I don't finish my projects. You will then later understand why I call myself like this. So let's start with the truth, right? And the truth is that there's not such thing as self-documented code. When we are developing something and we want to add new functionalities to our code or even fixing bugs, we'll just spend more time digging through the code than writing the code. So if we take a look at Python enhancement proposals, there is a comment that I really read a lot, and I argue with my colleagues, and it says this: the code is read more often than it is written. And this is actually true. When we are developing something, we are 1 out of 10 time we're writing code, and the other 9, we're actually reading it, or we're digging through it. And with all this information, I just asked myself a question. What is good code then? Is it just good because it just worked? Who knows, right? But what happens if we, as I said before, we need to debug the application and it's written like this? Can you imagine how much time will it take? It takes a lot of time. And with this question in mind, I also ask myself, what is clean code then? Is it just clean because it didn't throw any error? Well, I guess that software must be maintainable, understandable, and it has to be well written. And sometimes if someone asks you to document your well-thought implementations, you will feel insulted. And I know that sometimes, depending on the code you're writing, you won't need to document that code, because the logic is simple, and we told the code to do what we wanted to do. So you saw the code I was using 4 or 5 years ago. With MicroPython, I was playing a bit, and this is a mess. So back in January, I had to do a presentation about MicroPython, and I wanted to use some of the code that I used 4 or 5 years ago, and I didn't remember what actually the code was doing. So, I went back and tried to reuse some of the code, and I spent most of the time rewriting the code than actually understanding what I was doing back then. So let's take a look how the code looks right now. There's a huge difference, right? It actually took the same space of 3 functions to write only one that is really simple. It's just display. It fills an OLED LCD displays with a value of 0 or 1. That's pretty simple. But what happened if we had the code as I had it before? Now I know that if I leave the code for, let's say, 4 or 5 more years, in the future, I will know what I was actually trying to achieve. So in my experience, let me give you some advice so it will make your code better and you will help your colleagues. because I don't know how many of you are working for legacy codes and legacy products. I'm one of those. And when we try to add new functionalities to the code and we are entering into the project, there is a time which is called ramp-up process. And it takes a lot of time, first because we have to understand the product. And after understanding the product, we just have to get into the code and get our hands dirty. So let me give you those advice. This is something that most of the people will say that they are doing, but we're not actually doing it. And I tell you that we're not actually doing because sometimes when we code, we're in a rush because the client is asking for that functionality or for that specific bug to be fixed. And we say we do it, but we don't have the time to do it. But what happens if we just spend half a minute to 1 minute or two to document what we are actually doing? And when we dig through the code, we understand the logic, but we always forget to document what we actually understood. So you can see, read the Python enhancement proposals. I didn't even know that that phrase, that the code is read more often than it is written, it was in there. Because we just go to the point we want to read. And sometimes the first place we go for when we find an error or we want to implement a new things is Google. And at the end, we end up in Stack Overflow. But, you know, there are some times, like myself, we are working in a company which provides services to a final client, and that final client has only applications on premises. So we can, let's say, we cannot use that much Stack Overflow, so we have to dig into that code. So these are pretty simple steps. Use common names for variables and names. We all do for in range, whatever. And that maybe we later on will need it, and we don't know what is the actually name of the variable or what the variable is on that scope. I actually like the third one that we have, or we might need to separate the conditionals with blank space, because it makes the code maintainable, but it's not because it's maintainable, it's readable. It's actually readable, and it's easier to maintain. I like a log type hint since Python 3.5, and that actually helps when we are developing something, what is the type of the variable we're using. So we, of course, need to document the classes, functions, and methods, and everything that it has an important logic with inside the code. Sorry. English is not my mother language, so bear with me. And the final tool, I just went to a talk, and they were talking about why APF, which is a linter. It will redefine the code as you, it will purify the code. So we can use some of those tools automatically, but the good thing about this, documenting the code, you can finally generate documentation for the final product. So bear in mind that, it's good for some points, but I have to tell you some bad news. We as a developer are hired to write code. So if we wanted to tell a story, we might have studied something else. So when we develop something, we have to document. We know we don't do it. But when we document, we also have to maintain documentation. And this is something we also forget. We just change the logic of the function or whatever we're doing, and we also forget documentation. So this is pretty important for you to understand that when you contribute to projects or you are writing something on your own, it's good to document your code. So later in the future, someone else will understand what you were actually trying to achieve. So I was pretty fast because I didn't know if there was enough time for the talk. So thank you very much all for listening. If anyone has a questions.
Thank you very much, Juan. It's okay. Any questions in the audience? ¿Alguna pregunta y la traduzco?
I just want to say, yeah, go ahead.
thank you very much for the talk. Are you using the new type hinting system to have the documentation? For example, you in your example, you documented the types in the documentation.
But I didn't use it on MicroPython.
Huh?
You are gonna ask if
No,
I
no,
sorry.
yeah, the new type hinting system.
Yes.
Yeah, you will consider it for a for a help in the documentation.
Yes, actually, we, as I said, in the final client we're working for, we are doing some APIs and some products, and we also are maintaining some products. So this helps when we are doing separate things. So let's say we are working on the API and the backend, and the front end is, needs to know what the type of the variable is and what you have to pass to that API. So that's not only one of the reasons I use it on the code, or we use it on the code. It's also because, with only the name, maybe it's not that useful, the name of the variable. So you might need to know the type of the variable you're using, or you need to pass as an argument to the function or the method.
More questions? Yes.
I have a question. What is your opinion on documenting self-descriptive functions? You should always do it. It's because sometimes it's like kind of redundant.
Well, this is a discussion we have at work, because sometimes there are people that, as I said, they tell you the code is right there, just read it. But in my opinion, from my perspective, we should document everything that we know for sure we're doing, but someone else maybe doesn't know what you are doing. Because take into account that when you enter to a project, maybe that new person doesn't know what is the logic behind, or they didn't even know how to program in that language. Because this doesn't only apply for Python, it applies for every language. I personally worked in a company that was using a programming language that is unknown for almost all of us. It's called Cache, and it's used in the pharmaceutical companies and military companies. And that code, you couldn't even go to a Stack Overflow. You couldn't even reach for documentation in Google. So it was embedded on the, let's say, IDE for that language. So, you enter to the project, and what happens if the code is not documented? You will feel lost. So I said, yes, I will document as much as I can. Actually, inside the functions or methods, those logics could be understandable for you because you're the one doing it, but maybe for someone else it's not.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, sometimes using type hinting and even writing comments or even writing tests can delay or even interrupt somehow the development process when you're trying to just get something done and develop it quickly. And what's your take on this, and what kind of processes do you develop in the workplace to fix this, to be able to get things done quickly as much as sustaining it through time?
Well, we actually use type hint because we define a guideline on how to code, within the project. And we haven't experienced any performances issues. It actually helped us to develop quicker because we actually understood what we were doing. I know there are some times that maybe you don't need to type the variable, and it can make, depending on the situation, have a lower performance. But for us, in my opinion, we do it because we don't need that much performance. So I will do it,
More questions? Well, in that case, let's thank our speaker again.
Thank you.